Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you could all take your seats, we're going to get going. The first thing I just want to mention is an epic fail on behalf of the students and the next generation people who all forgot to come and get their photo taken. So if you're a student or you're here on a next gen ticket, if you could come to the front and get your photo taken at the very beginning of the lunch break, that would be great. And I will try and remind you of that later. Okay, if you can all take a seat and bring your conversations to a close, or I will be putting you all in detention later. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move into the politics session. And I guess we could say this most weeks, but this week in particular, there is a lot of politics to talk about. So much so that Mark Spencer, the farming minister in the Westminster government, is unable to be with us. He hasn't actually been reshuffled himself, but he's quite busy. I like to think that he's locked the new Environment Secretary, Steve Barclay, into a darkened room and is now explaining the SFI. And they'll probably be out by next week. Anyway, in his stead, we have Tim Morden, who is Deputy Director at DEFRA. He's also going to stay on after his speech and answer some questions. After that, I'm delighted to say that we'll welcome Mari Goujon, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands in the Scottish Government. And we'll also hear from Leslie Griffiths, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs in the Welsh Government. Let's start with DEFRA. Tim.
Well, thanks very much, Charlotte, for that introduction. So, as Charlotte said, I'm Tim Morden. I'm a Deputy Director in DEFRA, in the agri-food chain directorate, and my main area of interest is innovation, productivity and science. And I do realise that this is a bit like when you go to the theatre, and just as the curtain's about to go up, there's an announcement that for this evening's performance, the main role played by X is going to be taken by somebody you've never heard of. So I realise that I've got a lot to live up to. I'm not Mark Spencer, but I'll first of all start off with an apology from him. So I had a quick word with him yesterday, and he did say, can I pass on this message? So I'll read it out, what he said to me. He said, Tim, please do tell Robert and the team, let them know that I'm very sorry not to be able to make the AIC conference this year. I enjoyed attending it last year, and I was really looking forward to it. I hope it goes well, and you don't make too good a job of delivering my speech. So I'll do my best. Just picking up on what Charlotte said about ministers, we do have a new ministerial team, some of them. So I'm sure, like us, you were all following the BBC pages on Monday earlier this week, just to see where the reshuffle was going. And we have Steve Barclay as the new Secretary of State. Mark Spencer stays as Minister of State for Food, Farming and Fisheries. Lord Benyon and Rebecca Power still there. And Trudy Harrison has stepped down, and she made her plans clear some time ago. And we have a new Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, Robbie Moore, who some of you may know. He's an MP in West Yorkshire, in Keighley. I've met him a few times. He's got his farming background, so I hope at some stage you'll have a chance to meet him. So that's the new ministerial team, and portfolios, responsibilities are still being sorted out. So, and that tends to be what happens at this stage. So we haven't got any news on who's going to be doing what, but I think it's fairly safe to assume that Mark will still be the farming minister. So when Mark spoke at the AIC conference this time last year, I think it was his really first speech as Minister of State for Food, Farming and Fisheries. And I know that if he were here today, he would want to reflect on the past year, since a great deal has happened, of course, and he wanted to set out some of the many achievements that we have made over the past year. So when I say we, I mean ministers, but also obviously the work that civil servants do, but more importantly, when we say we don't just mean government, we mean working in partnership with the likes of yourselves and all the other stakeholders, industry, science communities, and everyone else that has a stake in the industry that we support. So, and I've been working in the agri-food chain area for just over 10 years now, and I really do believe that we have an excellent working relationship with AIC, and I have regular catch-ups with Robert. We don't always see eye to eye on absolutely everything, as you'd expect, but we do genuinely and sincerely sort of value your input via the various meetings and committees that you sit on, the regular informal meetings that you have with me and my fellow civil servants and ministers that you regularly see, the intelligence that you provide on a whole range of supply chain issues is always valued, and just the broad support you have supplied on a whole load of issues, in particular precision breeding, which I'll mention later if there's time. So I just want to start off by just touching on the report that Ed launched this morning, the Power in Productivity. Of course, this is still hot off the press, so I've just picked up a copy, haven't read it yet, although Robert was kind enough to send Mark Spencer, myself, an advanced copy sneak preview last week, and we've had a look through it, and it looks to me like a very thorough and impressive report, and I'm sure we're all, like everyone else, very grateful to Anglia Ruskin University for all the work they've done. And from a quick glance, it covers all the themes in real detail that are very important, and the ones that we always talk about when we're looking at how we can improve productivity while at the same time enhancing the environment and working towards our net zero goals. And you know, it covers the ones you'd expect about land use, technology, R&D skills, and so on. And I noted, of course, that the central recommendation in the report is the setting up of a UK Food Security Committee, and I know that Mark will look forward to reading it in more detail, and hopefully we'll have a discussion about the AIC's recommendations in this area in more detail in the coming weeks. So returning to what happened over the past year, a big highlight for many of us in DEFRA was the Farm to Fork Summit back in May, which has been mentioned a few times this morning, and it was hosted by the Prime Minister at number 10. And as far as I know, this was the first of its kind, and also grateful to Minette for pushing that through and making sure that Rishi Sunak kept to his word on having a summit. It brought together about 70 different businesses and experts representing all of the aspects of the food chain. At the time, it was the hot ticket in town, and I'm very pleased that Robert managed to get a ticket, and he was able to attend and actively participate in all of the really important sessions that took place. So the discussions at the summit focused on the most important issues: bringing great British food to the world, building resilience and transparency, strengthening sustainability and productivity across the supply chain, and growing an innovative and skilled food and farming sector. And some of these issues I notice are covered in the Anglia Ruskin report. Our then Secretary of State, Theresa Coffey, sat down with stakeholders to discuss a whole load of issues. And also the Prime Minister took an active role. He was there for the whole day, and I know that our ministers were particularly pleased that Rishi Sunak took such an interest, and demonstrated how highly the government values the UK farming industry and everyone involved in the supply chain. But I think our ministers were keen that the food and Farm to Fork Summit wasn't just about talking, but it was also about action. I think those of you who have met or listened to Mark Spencer speak before will have heard him chant this mantra about, it's more about the actions rather than the talking. And so that's about both letting farmers know what we're already doing to support our food system, to protect our country's natural capital, and also helping to support the industry with the challenges they face. Now, I know that Mark would have wanted to say something about the various announcements that have taken place and continue to take place around the support that's available, so I'll just mention some of those things. I'm sure you all know, it's been mentioned this morning about environmental land management, ELM. It's the foundation of our new approach, and our schemes will pay for sustainable farming practices such as reducing carbon emissions, creating and preserving habitat, and making landscape scale environmental changes, as well as improvements to animal health and welfare. And the ELM schemes invest in the foundations of food security. Food production and the environment go hand in hand. And we all know that supporting our natural capital, which means healthy soil, abundant pollinators, clean water, and so on, is the foundation for food security. So one of the schemes, again, it's been mentioned, SFI, Sustainable Farming Incentive, pays farmers to adopt and maintain sustainable farming practices, which improve soil health, reduce water pollution, and increase biodiversity. And this is an important step towards achieving the government's 25-year environmental plan, but also meeting our net zero targets. And the latest SFI was launched back in August of this year. It included twice as many new SFI actions compared to the previous year, as well as changes which allow farmers to earn more and produce more environmental benefits. And then another part of the ELMS package is the Landscape Recovery Scheme, which is taking the learning from other schemes and putting it into practice by supporting farmers to come together at a landscape scale and develop detailed plans for accessing private markets and private investment. I know the team in DEFRA that looks after ELM have been around the country engaging with farmers and others with an interest, listening to farmers about how they can make the scheme more flexible, giving farmers more choices about what contributions of actions they want to take, and helping them maximise the amount that they can earn from the scheme. I know that carbon emissions, measuring that has been mentioned this morning. That is a tricky one, as has already been discussed. But I can say the ministers are aware that reducing carbon emissions from agriculture is obviously a key part of working with Natural Captial, and we do have teams in DEFRA working on plans to increase confidence in the carbon audit tools, and I think they'll be set out quite soon. So it'll help farmers understand their emission sources through carbon audits, how to decarbonise their businesses, and hope that we can continue to work with AIC to develop these policies on that front. Supporting a thriving food production system and protecting our natural environment often requires new technology and ideas, and we are funding innovation, research and development in agriculture through our Farm and Innovation Programme, FIP. And this is one of my areas that I look after, and this is a 270 million programme. It runs up until 28-29. We're about halfway through at the moment, so we've already committed about 120 of that 270 million so far, and we've got some really good projects coming forward. Some of them are around robotics and agriculture, and we've got a few rounds of robotics and agriculture coming up or already underway. We're getting a good spread of projects, just making sure that all aspects of agriculture and horticulture are covered, also a good spread in terms of large businesses, SMEs, and also geographical spread. So, I think it's going quite well so far. And we have some really exciting projects underway, looking at new types of fertilisers and pesticides that are sustainable, and we also have some slightly more unusual and quirky projects, and one that was recently on the BBC's Country File was looking at whether a chemical compound in daffodils could be effective in reducing methane emissions. And we're also backing projects to monitor the environment. That, again, came up this morning in the discussions about more R&D on the environment. I think we are putting a lot of money in there, and some of them fairly mainstream. Again, one of the more unusual projects that's receiving funding is about how to monitor earthworms scratching and slurping as an indicator of soil health. And you might have heard it mentioned quite recently on Farming Today. And I've just realised I just mentioned Farming Today and Country File. I know that other TV programmes covering farming are available. Yeah, there's something on Amazon Prime, which I've never watched. And we also have the Farming Investment Fund, FIF, which offers funding towards equipment, technology and infrastructure to improve farm productivity and benefits the environment. And I know that a number of you here today will be supplying or advising farmers, and we want to continue to work closely to make sure that we are providing relevant, cutting-edge, innovative technologies that are really going to make a positive difference. Our next Farming Investment Fund competition will be 30 million for solar installations and robotics and automated equipment. We know that energy prices have posed a serious challenge to your sector, so investing in solar will not only offer some energy security, but will also help deliver some of the environmental goals that we're all striving for. So I'd encourage you to look out for announcements about that later this year, and the best thing to do is keep your eye on gov.uk. I'm sure it's your favourite website, so look out for that, and that should be later this year. I just wanted to return to precision breeding because it's come up a couple of times this morning. So alongside the grants that I mentioned to fund innovative technology to support natural environment, productivity and so on, in March this year the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Bill became an act, and this was something that fell under my remit as well. And I'd just like to thank the AIC because the support you provided during the course of the bill was really very helpful. So huge thanks for that. And I think our ministers were really keen to get the bill through Parliament as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible. It did go through Parliament very smoothly because it represents a major step, I think, in unlocking growth and innovation in technologies like gene editing, obviously, and to support our efforts to reinforce food security in the face of climate change and ensure we become leaders in agri-food innovation. So colleagues in my team are now working on the detailed legislation, the secondary legislation, statutory instruments that will bring the Act to life. These pieces of legislation will start coming into force next year. And in parallel, we've set up a precision working group, something that was announced at the Farm to Fork Summit back in May, where a small group of representatives are coming together representing the whole food supply chain to help us look at the opportunities, the barriers, the risks, the priorities and things like that. And I'm grateful to Ed Barker for being a member of the group and for his valuable input. I know that Mark would want to say something about, because he's got farming in his veins, and he wants to say something about supporting the livestock sector, and working with Natural Captial, which is what we're talking about today, also means protecting the resources on which farmers depend, including livestock. So bovine TB is one of the most difficult animal health challenges, and we know that it's caused considerable trauma to farmers, devastating impacts on their businesses, and a cost to the taxpayer of over 100 million a year. So ministers are really keen that we use every tool in the box to address that, provide a long-term strategy to combine all these tools and push the disease towards eradication. And I understand that we are seeing evidence that the strategy is working, so we now have fewer herds under restriction in England and have culled fewer cattle due to TB than any time since 2007. So hopefully that's good news. I think my time is about to run out, so I'll just start winding up and just conclude. So to conclude, I would like to reiterate that DEFRA has always had a very positive relationship with AIC. I certainly value the expertise and insight that you and your members provide, as well as constructive feedback we've received from you on emerging new and existing policies. And when Mark spoke at this event last year, I seem to recall him referring to AIC as a critical friend, and I still think that's an appropriate description for the relationship we have with you. So long may that continue. The next 12 months, will provide many opportunities for us to work together more closely, both at ministerial level and official level. And one of the discussions I often have with Robert is about our policies only being as good as their implementation and how important that is. So it's really important that AIC's network of agronomists and advisors and so on who understand what happens on the ground are regularly feeding back to us, and that's probably something we want to do more of, because it helps us understand whether our policies are meeting our aims and where we can tweak them, overhaul them or improve them. So I hope that you'll soon have an opportunity to meet Mark Spencer and the rest of the ministerial team, and I know that they're looking forward to working with you further as we move towards a more productive and sustainable farming system. So thank you very much.
Now we are running a little bit behind time, so forgive me, Tim, I'm going to be brisk with you. You mentioned FIP.
Yes.
Yes, which are about halfway through. What difference is that making on farms?
Well, it's about science projects. So I'm sure everyone in this room will know that science takes a while to work through. You don't get immediate results. Some of our really successful projects have been running for 10 years or more, And in fact, there was one on Farming Today this morning that was mentioned about, there I go again,
I had a day off, it's nothing to do with me.
about vegetable genetic improvement network that was mentioned, and that's been going for about 5 or 10 years. So it does take time. However, we are beginning to get some really good results, like the worm one I mentioned, which is a little bit niche and comical, I know, but there's more serious projects where we are getting some good results, and we actually want to be a bit more loud and proud about some of the results that are coming through, because they, it's really quite impressive and it is a game changer.
Let's take a question from Slido. Belinda Clark asks, Tim, you and your colleagues have to work with and brief yet another Secretary of State. What do you ask of the industry to help you ensure that he is an enabling force? How can we help? She asks.
Well, yeah, great. Thanks, Belinda. We are getting quite good at briefing new ministers, and what we have to go through in briefing new ministers, telling them the background, telling them what the evidence points to, where the policies have been and where we want to go, without making any assumptions about them, applies exactly the same to each of you that go and see a minister to lobby them on whatever your particular area is. So I always think that it goes to answer Belinda's question straight on, rather than as a politician. I always think that going in to see a minister and saying, we're here to help, how about this, is much better than saying you need to sort this out.
Okay. Hello, Tim, says Andrew McShane. Can you say when the National Action Plan for Agrochemicals will be released?
I can't. I know that it's been in preparation for a long time. It's had a long gestation. I know that I see, it's not my area, but I know that I've seen some emails flying around about it being coming into being, but I couldn't tell you exactly when it's going to happen.
Any details on timelines and areas of particular focus for NEIRF 3? I can't help.
No.
Maybe grab him in the break.
I suggest you do. Yeah. I think
okay.
I know what it is, but maybe grab me in the break and I'll discuss what I do know.
Okay. No mention of countryside stewardship, says Anonymous, when discussing elms. Is developing countryside stewardship still a priority, and will this sit within the elm structure?
Yeah. Well, you know that originally countryside stewardship was going to sit outside elm. It is part of it. I just didn't mention it because I was galloping through and running out of time, but it's still very much part of it at the moment. And we know that uptake is increasing.
One quick one to ask. Tim, will gene editing legislation signed into law and ready to go before the next general election? How do we address SCO and WAI not aligning? Right.
On timing, I don't know when the general election will be. We could all have a guess, but we might be wrong. I would just say what I said just now, which is the timing for the secondary legislation, which will bring the Act to life, starting with plants, and that's something we're working with the industry with, it will be in the summer of next year. Whether that's before or after an election, we don't know. How do we address Scotland and Wales not aligning? Well, look, there could be, that's a difficult one to answer. Agriculture is devolved, and it's entirely up to Scotland and Wales how they want to adopt gene editing, precision breeding. That's up to them. There could be a number of reasons. Some of them could be technical, they could be political. Sometimes it might just be practical. There's only so much that any government department has resource to do, and this might just not be a priority for Scotland and Wales yet. That's how I'd answer that one, Charlotte.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. I know Tim will be around for a bit, so do feel free to cross-question him at lunchtime. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, well, while we're talking about devolved administrations, let's hear from our next speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Mari Goujon, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and Islands in the Scottish Government. Mari.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And just to say, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be at the AIC annual conference, not least to be here to listen to the brilliant lineup of speakers that you've had so far this morning. But I also just wanted to share with you and tell you a bit more about how we're reforming and ultimately transforming agriculture in Scotland. Now, the last few years, of course, have been undoubtedly really challenging for the agricultural industry. And I think Minette, when she was addressing you this morning, set that out very clearly and just some of the challenges that everyone's been up against. So that's why it has been a priority for the Scottish Government to ultimately provide as much stability and as much fiscal certainty as possible, not just for farmers, but also for everyone in the wider supply chain too. So that's why we're now making farm payments at the earliest ever date and why we've also committed to a phased approach to reform. And I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that there is no cliff edges when it comes to support for our farmers in Scotland. But the reality is that we don't have any clarity from either Labour or the Tories on what a future Westminster government will provide in terms of future funding, which I think does all feel a bit unnecessarily uncertain at the moment. So please forgive me, and while others can hear me, I want to make Scotland's claim on this loud and clear. We'd like a return, at the very least, to what we had before Brexit. We want that multi-annual funding with a fair, transparent share of the available UK funding envelope coming directly to Scotland so that we can determine how best to invest it to meet our industry's needs and our industry's interests. Now, Brexit, of course, is still happening. There is more disruption potentially to come when we see import controls finally introduced. Now, I think we all warned of what this might mean, but I don't think any of us could have been truly prepared for the short-term harms that it's also created. So I'd also like to add in one more ask, or perhaps that's two, for an EU veterinary agreement that eliminates the trade barriers that exist, as well as common business-friendly sense to prevail on the labelling front, both in terms of the Windsor Agreement and more generally for all the agricultural businesses which conduct trade across the water, but also internationally too. Now, these are things, of course, that aren't just Scotland specific and which I'm sure AIC members all across the UK would welcome. What is specific to Scotland, though, is our vision for agriculture. So published in March last year, it sets out how we're intending to transform support for farming and food production in Scotland to become a global leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. The Scottish Government remains fully committed to providing direct payments to support that active farming and food production, but we'll also shift half of all funding for farming and crofting from unconditional to conditional support by 2025. Now, while that is our intent and indeed a policy commitment that the SNP was elected into government on in 2021, we might well be constrained from doing that through both the Internal Market Act and the Subsidy Control Act. Indeed, including agricultural support in the scope of the UK Subsidy Control Act, I think may yet prove to be the worst example of self-harm that a Westminster government has ever imposed on its citizens. And while future trade agreements are now fraught with risk as a result, so too is Scotland's ability to design a support framework for food production which is tailored to our own needs. Thanks to the legislation that's been imposed on us, we might now be prevented from doing so. And frankly, the agriculture industry everywhere in the UK deserves better than this constant uncertainty around funding, of having to operate under the shadow of trade deals that sell out their interests. And every day we see new barriers and new costs to trade coming to fruition. That's why, as Scotland's Rural Affairs Secretary, I work hard to protect the industry from those risks and threats and to try and provide that stability and that security too. But I don't want you to think that that doesn't mean we're not prepared for things to change in Scotland. We do look and learn across these islands, and like the UK and Welsh governments, we're also legislating for reform with an agriculture bill introduced this September to the Scottish Parliament. Now, that bill will enable the delivery of support beyond 2025, and it will provide powers for us to make future payments under a framework that incentivises those low-carbon approaches to ultimately improve the resilience, the efficiency and the profitability of the sector. And importantly, that bill retains the flexibility which allows us to adapt and respond to advances in science, to advances in technology, such as the development of methane inhibitors, which are going to be a key tool for cutting livestock emissions. The bill also seeks to put into law the 4 overarching objectives of Scotland's agricultural policy and delivering a framework that's going to support the adoption and use of sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices, the production of high-quality food, the facilitation of on-farm nature restoration, climate mitigation and adaptation, and enabling rural communities to thrive. I want to focus on one that I know will be close to the hearts of many people in this room, and of course, me too, the production of high-quality food. In Scotland, we recognise that farmers still want their crucial role in producing food recognised and to have that role valued too. And indeed, that role is more crucial than ever right now. Adapting to a changing climate and farming for nature matter hugely, not just for farming, but to provide more food security for everyone across these islands. Brexit, the pandemic and war in Ukraine highlighted the importance and the need for food security and that resilience too. Now, we've already heard today, including in Ed Barker's session, launching the new AIC report about the importance of giving food security that focused attention and that dedicated resource. I welcome that report and I agree with its conclusion. The report adds weight to the Scottish Government's realisation that food security matters now more than ever. That's why, in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Scottish Government established a short-life food security and supply task force. A key recommendation from that task force was to establish a new food security unit within the Scottish Government, which we have now done. It will take forward the legacy activity of the task force and is currently developing evidence-based monitoring for supply chain risks. Now, at the same time, we know that we need to give people more assurance than ever before about the provenance and the quality of their food. The Scottish Government remains wholly committed to quality assurance through the schemes operated on our behalf by Quality Meat Scotland and AHDB. We also recognise that animal health and welfare standards matter to our consumers, and that improving animal health is such an important way of cutting emissions. And that's why there's a funded work stream on this in our agricultural reform programme, whereby we're providing funding for farmers and crofters to undertake animal health and welfare plans. The work to actually create and populate our new support framework continues in parallel. The very foundations of this work actually started with 5 farmer-led groups who were pooling their invaluable expertise and ideas to help us map what a low-carbon future in different sectors might look like. So that covered arable, suckler beef, dairy, hill and upland farming, and the pig sector too. Now, the work done by these groups has been taken forward by the Agricultural Reform Implementation Oversight Board, which is co-chaired by me and the President of NFU Scotland, Martin Kennedy. And its work is supported by an academic advisory panel. The board is made up of farmers, crofters and land managers, and this co-design and that co-production with them is, in my view, absolutely critical to getting purchase from them to take forward and adopt the reforms. And indeed, I see it as the only way in which our approach or the reforms we set out can hope to be a success. And remarkably, I think given how different people's experiences are, how different their land is, their soil, their farm type and their business model, we do appear to be making really good progress with strong support for our new funding framework that includes payments under 4 tiers of base, enhanced, elective and complementary support, and the vast majority of those payments across these tiers being conditional. But we're also not going to be waiting until the new framework is in place before we take action. Changes will start from 2025. New conditions will be introduced, including the maintenance of existing cross-compliance requirements, the introduction of new protections for peatlands and wetlands, the foundations of a whole farm plan, and the introduction of new conditions to the Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme, which are also linked to calving intervals. Now, these new conditions will help businesses improve their productivity, it'll increase the efficiency of the farming activity, introduce different ways of farming which are more low carbon and beneficial for biodiversity, as well as then reducing emissions too. We're also incentivising people to introduce some changes now and to create these productivity baselines for the whole farm plan approach, which will go live in 2025. So right now we have funding available for soil testing, animal health and welfare plans, carbon audits, and we're looking to add biodiversity audits to that support too. A key part of the new whole farm plans will be ensuring that industry is aware of the support for effective business planning. Cattle keepers will also be able to access data through My Herd Stats to provide consistent and accurate insight into herd performance to assist in improving that business efficiency. And our approach to reform is to introduce measures which make business sense as well as carbon sense. But there is no doubt that how we use and how we farm land has to change to mitigate and adapt to climate change and to do more to protect as well as to restore nature. Scotland's land use strategy sets out our long-term vision and objectives for that sustainable land use. Scotland's land and the natural capital it supports is ultimately one of our most valuable assets. It's vital to our national prosperity and to our well-being as individuals and to the communities who depend on it too. Everyone has a stake in Scotland's land. Everyone has a responsibility to ensure that that land is used productively, and everyone should also benefit from Scotland's land. The way in which land is owned, managed and used is centrally important to a variety of outcomes, including achieving our net zero greenhouse gas targets. And land use is crucial in underpinning our policies to combat the climate emergency and achieve our statutory target of reaching net zero by 2045. In Scotland, as in the other UK countries, urban communities are of course going to rely heavily on rural communities and businesses to help deliver our climate change targets as well as our net zero ambitions. And that's another reason why the Scottish Government will continue to support our farmers, crofters, as well as our local communities to ensure that they can capitalise on the benefits of land use change, and so that to ensure that we do have that just transition too. But of course, change is never easy. And one of the key ways to deliver and support change with any group of people is through peer-to-peer learning. And of course, there's ample evidence there to show that this model works. That's why we're also supporting a refreshed Monitor Farm programme run by Quality Meat Scotland until 2026. And Tier 4 of our new framework will focus on that advice, on that support and continuous professional development for farmers and crofters too. Now, there will be a large element of peer-to-peer learning in the AIC, which is the Advice, Knowledge, Information Service, from 2026 onwards. But we know that change is difficult, so we're doing everything we can to engage people so that they know what is coming and when it's going to be coming too. So to ensure the sector is kept informed and to enable them to prepare for the future, I published a route map to those changes earlier this year. Now, this route map, which is available for everyone to access online, sets out how and when current schemes are going to change, and it also includes then key dates on where to find that guidance and when that support will become available. Now, the route map was last updated in June this year and made clear what changes are going to start in 2025 to give farmers and crofters that time to prepare. And I do have an ask of AIC members in the room today who I know have long-standing relationships with Scotland's farmers and crofters. And that is to really help us to disseminate the information that's available about those changes that are coming in 2025. I know that you'll have spent years and decades in some cases developing these really strong business relationships with individual farmers as well as across the sectors that they farm in. You don't just sell them products and equipment, you provide that really valued advice and support about what's new, what's changing and where to go next. And in short, AIC members are trusted hugely by those they do business with. So I would ask you to help us to reach those farmers and crofters in Scotland who might not yet be engaging with our reform programme or who might not know what support is available. Please tell them about the changes and where to find the route map. Reassure them that direct payments are continuing beyond 2026, but that they need to start now by doing more in return for that. We need you to help make our transition to low-carbon, sustainable farming happen. And it's important not to forget why we're doing all this and why that needs to happen. Every year, we experience more extreme weather events, and in early summer, the struggle was with water scarcity. This autumn, we've had record rainfall in the shortest time. Most recently, we've also experienced the truly devastating impacts of Storm Babette, most acutely in my own constituency, which is in the northeast of Scotland, with crops, livestock, and indeed human lives lost too. I don't think any of us who've dealt with the aftermath of recent storms, flooding, and those drought conditions think that this is a sustainable way to live or to do business. None of us will thrive in such circumstances, so there is a role for us all to play in tackling climate change and nature loss. It can't be just farmers, crofters and land managers who have to change. All the supply chain businesses, many of whom are members of AIC, of course, need to play their part too. I know a lot of you already are, and I want to hear more about that, especially about the technological advances and innovations that you're all investing in. Because ultimately, if we are to succeed in our journey to a sustainable low-carbon future for farming and food production, not just in Scotland, but everywhere in the UK, then we need to do that together. Thank you.
And Mari will be answering questions in just a moment, so get yourselves onto Slido. Mari's Welsh counterpart was unable to be with us today, but she has pre-recorded something for us. Ladies and gentlemen, Leslie Griffiths, Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs in the Welsh Government.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. This conference marks the milestone of 20 years of AIC as a leading voice in the agri-supply industry, and I congratulate your success. Let me start by saying I continue to be impressed by the resilience, ingenuity and dedication of agriculture here in Wales, particularly when we face the challenges of increasing cost pressures, an uncertain period of change and dealing with the realities of climate change. Leaving the European Union has taken Welsh farmers out of the relative predictability of a 7-year budget agreement. This year sees the end of EU Rural Development Programme spending. From now on, it will be solely as domestic funding that supports the rural economy in Wales. The economic situation is putting pressure on everyone: farmers, businesses, individuals and governments. I have been open about the serious financial situation Wales faces, the toughest position since devolution. Our financial position is up to £900 million lower in real terms than when the UK Government set the budget at the last spending review in 2021. The Welsh Government has outlined the difficult choices ministers have to make, and unfortunately this has meant reprioritising some of the rural affairs budget to ensure essential public services are maintained. These are not choices I nor my ministerial colleagues want to make, but it is the reality we are facing. In doing so, I tried to provide some stability for farmers and rural businesses by prioritising the BPS 2023 budget, which remains at £238 million. We know how important this is to everyone in our rural communities. Let me be clear, the budget situation for next year is perhaps even tougher, and discussions with my Cabinet colleagues are ongoing. Despite the financial uncertainty, we cannot afford to delay our response to the climate and nature emergencies, and my aim remains to create a prosperous, sustainable agricultural sector in Wales for our future generations. There are opportunities for all types of Welsh farms to deliver environmental, economic and social outcomes whilst sustainably producing food. It is essential to maintain and develop a thriving and sustainable agricultural sector in Wales. We in the Welsh Government are focusing our support on improving environmental performance, responding to the climate emergency and enhancing on-farm biodiversity. My on-farm land management schemes are about ensuring resilience, from reducing carbon and greenhouse gas emissions to supporting improvements to air, soil, water quality and biodiversity. Our rural investment schemes support rural enterprises and employment, ensuring strong links between agriculture and our communities. We began making 2023 BPS advance payments to farmers from the 12th of October, with more than £160 million paid to over 15,700 farm businesses. Our current EU RDP spend stands at over £796 million, which is over 94% of the total programme value. All RDP payments must be paid by the 31st of December 2023 if we are to fully maximise the available EU funds. I'm sure you are aware of the growing importance consumers place on animal welfare. We will only be able to get good prices for Welsh animal produce in the future if we can assure consumers and the supply chain that our farmed animals have a good quality of life. We have exciting proposals and pilot projects for farmers to be rewarded for high standards of animal health and welfare in our future sustainable farming scheme. This is a win-win-win. Consumers, farmers and our environment all benefit from ensuring livestock are healthy and perform efficiently. Other proposed actions in the SFS, such as soil testing and benchmarking, will also complement these animal health improvements to help farms become more efficient and resilient in the face of climate change. And we must continue exploring how best to integrate habitats and trees into the scheme to complement farm businesses. These are difficult subjects, but if we work together, we can find the best solutions. Before I conclude, I want to thank all of you who helped develop the Agriculture Act. Many of you and your farming contacts contributed to the preparation and scrutiny work. The Agricultural Act became law in August, the first ever Agricultural Act for Wales. I'm very excited to have this Made in Wales legislation to underpin our Welsh priorities and support sustainable farming into the future. The Act establishes the sustainable land management objectives to underpin future government support, including the Sustainable Farming Scheme. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I wish you a very successful conference. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Right, some questions, and you will notice that Robert has come back as well, so he can answer some of these too. We'll start with the most popular on Slido. To vote something the most popular, just press the thumbs up. Beyond the political point scoring, Mari, what are the unique needs that Scotland has which differ from the rest of the UK?
Well, I would say, first of all, on the political point scoring point, I mean, I think it's important to recognise, and I'm sure if Mark and Leslie were here today, that we do genuinely try to work together on areas of common interest, and there are areas where, of course, we work really closely together. But there are, of course, areas where there are key differences in our approach. And I don't think there's any getting around the fact that the biggest issue for us at the moment is the lack of clarity of support that's available going forward into the future. And that's, and just as I was calling for in my remarks there, where we really missed when we were part of CAP, at least you had the 7-year programme, you knew what was coming, when you were going to receive it, you could then plan accordingly. Right now we get our budgets on an annual basis and we don't have any clarity of what that support is going to look like from 2025. Also, the replacement funding that we get since we left the EU used to be, well, when we were members of the EU, we could get a mixture of capital and resource funding. We don't get any capital replacement funding now, which of course causes us significant difficulties. And we also have the issues with trade deals as well. So there are fundamental points of difference there where we think we should have more of a say and where that impacts devolved interests and where that impacts our agriculture sector and where we don't have that say at the moment. I would say that the unique needs that we have, which differ from the rest of the UK, you can tell that from we do have different challenges in Scotland than to what other farmers in the UK would have. I think particularly when you look at the less favoured areas that we have, that's the support that we've continued in Scotland that's been discontinued elsewhere. Some of the farming types that we have in some of the most remote and rural parts of Scotland, and particular support that we need to provide there. And I think that touches on another point I made in my remarks too, and where the Internal Market Act and the Subsidy Control Act impact that. Because while we provide less favoured area support, and that's obviously particularly important for us in Scotland, we could then face challenge potentially under the Subsidy Control Act because agriculture was included in that, which we felt was very unusual because it's not included in other parts of the world, and we felt it was really unusual that it was included as part of the Subsidy Control Act, and we don't think agriculture should have formed part of that. And where we do have that threat, the policy choices we make in Scotland could then be constrained as a result.
Let's talk about one of the points of difference. We've got quite a few questions on this same subject. Now we know a little more about how the EU are going to regulate novel genomic techniques. What's the Scottish Government's view on implementing precision breeding regulations? And somebody else asked, would the Scottish Government consider establishing an expert group to consider precision breeding technology policy and the business implications of divergence? And other people ask, how are you thinking that this is going to work when England is doing something so radically different?
Well, I think that's been part of an issue. I think coming to the Precision Breeding Act, first of all, I mean, that was something that the Scottish Parliament as a whole, regardless of political party, did not agree with, because the powers that it gave the UK government to legislate in devolved areas. So that's why when we had a mechanism called the Legislative Consent Memorandum, the Scottish Government refused consent to that because of that mechanism. So like I say, that's not a political point. So I think we have fundamental differences in the application of that Act and what that means for us in Scotland. But I think that we've made our position as the Scottish Government clear, and from the moment we left the EU, we had committed to maintaining EU alignment, potentially going beyond that, where that worked for us as well. And this has been an area that we've been following closely. So right now we have a policy, we don't support genetic modification or the cultivation of GM crops. I know that gene editing is different to that. That's why we've been monitoring what's been happening in the EU in relation to this issue as well, and we'll continue to monitor that going forward. But we continue to support science and innovation in Scotland. I think it's important not to forget that. I mean, we make, I think it's around £50 million a year to our, I think, we have really world-leading institutes in Scotland when it comes to science, research and innovation. So I don't think we can look at gene editing as the silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems that we face. And I think it's where that continued investment in science and technology, looking at other solutions that are out there and other advances, are also a critical part of that equation as well. But again, that's why I'm here, and I'm more than happy to have that conversation with people too about it. And I think it's important that we have that wider conversation about it. I'm not with our science community in Scotland, with our agricultural community too, as well as with wider society as a whole.
Robert, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we've engaged with you over several years on this, and we've supported precision breeding because we've talked to our members about that, and that's why we've given support to the English government on that. We see innovation, research, development, new techniques, and you're right, the UK's got some brilliant research centres, some amazing ones in Scotland as well. What we must do is ensure those brains in those centres are used to the maximum benefit of UK agriculture and Scottish agriculture. Yeah. So what we don't want to see is legislative barriers to innovation getting in the way of those brains and being taken out to other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see as a productive issue for UK agriculture, Scottish agriculture, that if we don't get the legislative framework right, we risk those people disappearing off to other parts of the world. And when it comes to internal investment, I know that's happening already, because I talk to businesses and they tell me, look, we can't quite decide. Do we invest in the UK, in Scotland? Do we invest in Europe? Do we take our investment to the Americas, to the Far East? We've got to make decisions about return on capital. Mm-hmm. But I don't want us to miss those opportunities that could be great for UK agriculture.
Two quick last questions shoved together for time, forgive me. Andrew Meredith, you have talked actually a bit about why you're constrained in delivering direct payments after 2025. What are the alternatives, asks Andrew from Farmers Weekly. And are there plans for Scottish and English government to work together with farmers and the borders to support with funding schemes on land either side of that border?
In terms of the alternatives there and how we're constrained going forward, I think I probably responded to some of that in relation to the Subsidy Control Act. So obviously we're in the process of delivering future support in Scotland. So we're still to see the potential impacts of subsidy control and how that could impact us going forward. So I think that's one we'll have to continue to monitor. But I think it's particularly in the area of the less favoured areas support and what we offer our farmers and crofters in that regard, which I think could be the area which is at biggest risk as a result of that as well. And sorry, the second point?
That was about, are there plans for Scottish and English government to work together with farmers on the borders to support with funding schemes with land either side of that border?
Oh, I'm more than happy to have that discussion with UK government counterparts as well. We have tended to have regular meetings both between the devolved administrations and the UK government to discuss various issues across our different governments. So more than happy to have that conversation.
Okay, let's go to a Slido question, everybody, before lunch. Does the industry believe that current government policies will promote a profitable and sustainable agriculture in the coming years? Vote like mad. I'm not going to ask you how you'd vote because I know the first question would be, which government? Just choose a government randomly, ladies and gentlemen, and vote for that. Does the industry believe that current government policies will promote a profitable and sustainable agriculture in the coming years? Let's have a quick look. Mildly disagree, 42%. Oh, it's disappeared. No, it's dismissed. Can we have the Slido back? Thank you. Mildly disagree, 47%. Mildly agree, 20%. Strongly disagree, 19%. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for that. Could we firstly thank Mari and Robert?
Thank you, Mary.
But mainly Mari.